I'm Claire Thompson, 29. The daughter branded a failure before I ever had a chance to define myself. And tonight I realize I'm done letting their verdict be my truth. At the Thompson table, my brother Daniel has always been the crown jewel, every toast, every framed photo, every ounce of pride poured into him like fine wine. My victories? Laughed off, diminished, erased. But the night my mother raised her glass and said, "At least we know Daniel will never be a failure," something inside me hardened. I didn't shatter. I woke up. Ever been told you were the shame of your own family? Hit like if you've ever been dismissed in the place you needed recognition most. Comment if someone else's spotlight has always swallowed yours. It all began with a dinner I'll never forget. The maitre d' pulled out my chair at the end of the long table, candlelight flickering across crystal glasses, and I slid into my place, the one they always reserved for disappointment. I arrived late, of course. Not late enough to be disrespectful, but late enough for every pair of eyes at the table to flick toward me, then away with practiced disappointment. The Thompson family never needed words to remind me of my place. They wielded glances sharper than knives. The maitre d' pulls out a chair at the end of the long table, and I slide into it, my coat still heavy on my shoulders. The restaurant hums with warmth, candlelight reflecting off crystal glasses, low jazz spilling from hidden speakers, the smell of garlic and truffle oil drifting through the air. It should feel indulgent, comforting, but for me it's a stage. Every flicker of a candle, every clink of glass seems to spotlight my inadequacy. Daniel is already in full flight, recounting some triumph from his firm. My parents lean toward him, expressions beaming with the pride they ration so sparingly with me. He talks about mergers and clients as if the fate of the nation depends on him, and they hang on every word. I sip from the water glass in front of me, trying to disappear into the linen tablecloth. Still, I try. I clear my throat and mention a project, just a freelance app I'd been helping a small nonprofit with. It mattered to me, the kind of work that helped people, rather than padded portfolios. But before I can finish the sentence, my mother interrupts. She doesn't even mean to be cruel. Her laugh is light, melodic, rehearsed from years of cocktail parties. "Oh, Claire, always tinkering with your little hobbies," she says, eyes cutting sideways toward my father. "At least Daniel's career is serious." The words fall heavier than the fork I set down. Heat climbs my neck. Around me, the table keeps moving, waiters topping off wine, nearby patrons laughing too loud, but I feel frozen, as if this booth has turned into a display case, and I am the exhibit of failure they've all agreed to view. Daniel doesn't miss a beat. He segues into another story, how his fiancée's father invited him to a private equity retreat. He's charming, confident, completely comfortable in the role of golden child. The contrast between us grows sharper with every anecdote. My parents nod along, eyes shining, the kind of eyes that once looked at me before they learned to shift their admiration elsewhere. I push pasta around my plate. I try to contribute again, to describe a recent client who appreciated my design skills, but my father waves it off. "That's nice, dear, but you really should consider something more stable." Stable, in his dictionary, means something they can brag about at dinners like this. Then comes the toast. My mother lifts her glass of Chianti, her manicured fingers catching the candlelight. "At least we know Daniel will never be a failure." The air leaves the room. Silverware stills. Even Daniel falters, though only for a second before basking again in the spotlight. All eyes turn to me, as if my silence will confirm the prophecy. I swallow my anger, stares prickling my skin. The window beside me reflects the city lights, bright and alive beyond the glass, so different from the suffocation inside this booth. I lock my gaze there, steady and silently vow. This won't be forever. The night I left Yale, my mother said only one sentence: "You've embarrassed us." The words never left me. They hovered like a smoke alarm that never stopped shrieking, even years later when I tried to bury them under piles of work, cheap takeout cartons, and the neon haze from the laundromat sign across the street. Failure, in their eyes, wasn't a single misstep, it was a permanent scar, stamped onto me as if by fire. I sit on the edge of my futon in the Boston apartment I call home, though it feels more like a temporary shelter than a life. The walls are beige, too thin to hold warmth, the radiator coughs instead of heats, and the glow from the laundromat sign paints my ceiling in garish orange. It's late autumn. Outside, the air smells of wet leaves and the city's unrelenting traffic. Inside, the only sound is the whir of my laptop, a machine too old to keep up but too necessary to discard. The screen lights up, illuminating the clutter on my desktop. Folders half finished, projects abandoned halfway, each one proof of how my energy burned out before completion. I drag a finger across the trackpad, pausing over a file that has sat there for years, gathering metaphorical dust. Its name is Ordinary Life Map, X else X, yet the little green icon pulses, as if mocking me. I remember the night at Yale as if it's still happening. The dorm smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt popcorn, the smell of 1,000 anxious students. I had a suitcase half packed, textbooks splayed open on the floor like corpses after battle. My body was exhausted from nights of no sleep, my mind cracked under expectations I could never seem to meet. I phoned home, thinking maybe they'd hear the fracture in my voice and show concern. Instead, silence stretched across the line until my mother's voice cut it in half. "You've embarrassed us." No comfort followed. My father didn't even take the phone. He'd perfected the art of cold distance, and I imagined him sitting with his paper in the living room, letting her words stand as the family verdict. That night, I closed my suitcase and walked out of the dorm, dragging the zipper like a chain behind me. No one stopped me. Not the RA, not my classmates, certainly not my parents. The worst wound wasn't their anger, it was the absence of anything else. Anger at least meant I mattered. Their silence was louder than screaming, telling me I was already forgotten, a line item crossed off the Thompson family ledger. Daniel, meanwhile, was thriving. I still see him on that same evening, thousands of miles away, shining under the fluorescent lights of some lecture hall, raising his hand to deliver an answer professors applauded. Later, he'd send a picture of himself in a suit, shaking hands with someone important, the caption reading, "Big things coming." My parents flooded the family group chat with heart emojis and exclamation marks. My text, "I'm leaving Yale," was ignored. I click through a few files on my laptop, the glow reflecting in my tired eyes. Freelance invoices, drafts of articles never submitted, an abandoned proposal for a nonprofit's app. Each document whispers of effort but not victory. The weight of them all presses against my chest. Still, the life map file waits, stubborn, unyielding. I double-click it, half expecting it to refuse to open like everything else in my life. Instead, a grid of cells sprawls across the screen. Color-coded boxes chart dreams I once mapped out at 19, startups I would launch, causes I would support, skills I would master. The sheet is equal parts naive and ambitious, but it is undeniably mine. Rows of faded ambitions stare back like an old friend who has grown tired of being ignored. I lean back, rubbing the bridge of my nose. My mother's sentence rings again in my ears. "You've embarrassed us." But beneath it, something else stirs, softer, older. A stubborn spark that Yale's collapse, my parents' disdain, and Daniel's endless success couldn't fully extinguish. The cursor blinks inside a cell, patient, waiting. I realize my fingers are hovering over the keyboard, ready to type, ready to begin again. For the first time in years, the silence of the apartment feels less like abandonment and more like opportunity. Claire whispers to herself, "Maybe I can still build something. If I can help just one person, it will matter." I told myself as I typed the first line of data. The numbers blinked back at me on the library's aging desktop monitor. Pale green rows, set against a blank grid. Boston Public Library in the winter was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the shuffle of shoes across the marble floor and the occasional cough from the stacks. Outside, snow pressed against the tall arched windows, coating the city in a kind of muffled gray. Inside, the Wi-Fi stuttered as if unwilling to carry my hopes forward. Yet, with each keystroke, LifeMap began to take shape, cell by cell. I hunched over the keyboard, pulling together fragments from scattered PDFs, news articles, and government sites. The data was messy healthcare resources, buried behind jargon, directories out of date, contact numbers that rang into voids. Still, I entered them all, aligning columns like bones snapping into place. It felt futile at first, but the file became a container for stubborn purpose. The cold air followed me even inside. The vents rattled, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the smell of old paper mingled with the faint tang of disinfectant. I was the only one at that row of computers until footsteps stopped behind me. A voice, warm but curious, leaned in. "You building something? Looks more complicated than homework." I turned, startled. A man about my age, bundled in a worn hoodie, hair tied back, eyes bright in the dim light. He introduced himself casually. Mark Rivera, coder, night owl, apparently allergic to silence. He looked at my screen as if deciphering its skeleton. "You're cleaning data manually?" That's ambitious. I don't know how to code, I admitted. I just thought if I can make this usable for people who don't know where to look, maybe someone won't get lost. Mark's smile widened. That's noble, but also inefficient. You're trying to shovel snow with a spoon. Let me help. I can write scripts to scrape this. Organize it automatically. His tone wasn't pitying, it was alive, as if he saw a puzzle worth solving. I hesitated. Trust wasn't something I offered freely anymore, especially after years of being reminded how easily I failed. But there was something disarming about his enthusiasm, something that made me think of the file differently, not just as my fragile lifeline, but as the seed of something real. I nodded slowly. Okay, but it has to stay simple, for people who don't have time or patience for apps. We began working side by side in the library's dim corner, the glow of screens reflecting off our faces. Hours slipped by unnoticed. My columns expanded, his scripts refined them, cross-checking, cleaning duplicates, building a searchable structure. What had once been a cluttered spreadsheet began resembling a map, life map, the name I had typed months ago, in hope, now gaining flesh. The proof of its value arrived unexpectedly. An elderly woman shuffled into the library, wrapped in scarves, carrying a tote bag that looked heavier than she was. She asked a librarian for help finding healthcare information, only to be waved vaguely toward the public computers. She sat beside me, confusion clouding her face as pop-ups assaulted the screen. Something in me pushed past hesitation. "Can I try helping?" I asked. She nodded, desperate. I pulled up the draft version of LifeMap, typed in her condition, and sorted through clinics that still accepted her insurance. Within minutes, I found a community health center a few blocks from her apartment. She blinked at the printout I gave her, disbelief softening into relief. Her hands, thin and trembling, reached out to grip mine with surprising strength. "You saved me more than the doctors ever did," she whispered. Tears shone in her eyes. My throat tightened. I could barely breathe. For the first time in years, I felt the opposite of failure. Mark watched silently, then gave me a small nod, the kind you give when witnessing something that doesn't need commentary. That night, long after the woman left with her directions clutched like a lifeline, I stayed behind, staring at the spreadsheet that no longer felt like a dream. The snow outside had thickened, muffling the city into silence again. My laptop pinged with a new notification. I opened my inbox, expecting another spam message. Instead, the subject line glowed. "We'd like to discuss a partnership." My heart jolted as if the walls of the library had shifted. This was no longer just a file. It was the beginning of a fight I hadn't dared imagine. Claire checks her inbox and email. "We'd like to discuss a partnership. Daniel just bought a new penthouse," my mother announced, as if she'd won the lottery herself. Her voice carried through the dining room like a victory bell. The chandeliers above threw golden light across polished wood, glinting off every picture frame on the walls, each one a shrine to Daniel's milestones. Yale graduation, law firm gala, ski trips in Aspen, a glossy photo of him shaking hands with a senator. Not a single space featured me. The smell of roasted lamb and rosemary butter filled the room, but my appetite had died before I sat down. The Thompson residence was grand but suffocating, a museum where every artifact told me I didn't belong. I sat at the end of the table, opposite Daniel, who twirled his wine glass silently, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Susan leaned closer to Richard, eyes sparkling with maternal pride. "A penthouse in Tribeca. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Can you imagine the view?" She laughed as though Daniel's success was proof of her own brilliance. Richard nodded approvingly, his gaze moving over his son with the kind of silent admiration I'd begged for all my life. I shifted, fingers tracing the rim of my water glass. My throat ached to speak, to tell them something of my own. LifeMap pulsed inside me like a quiet flame, fragile but alive. "I've been working on something," I began carefully, measuring each word. "It's called LifeMap. My mother's laughter cut through my sentence, sharp as glass. "Don't waste time on hobbies, dear." She didn't even look at me, just reached for the salt. The casual dismissal sliced deeper than outright cruelty. Daniel's fork scraped his plate, but he kept his eyes down, chewing methodically. He didn't come to my defense. He never did. My brother was the family's crown jewel, and silence was his way of maintaining the shine. I pushed on anyway, my voice quieter now. "It's helping people find health care. A woman said it saved her." Susan waved her hand like brushing off lint. "That's sweet, Claire. but you really should think about something stable. Daniel just got another promotion. Did you know Richard? Senior partner track at 31. Richard raised his glass with a solemn smile. We couldn't be prouder. The words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. My food went cold. The heat rose in my face, a cocktail of shame and fury. I wanted to shout, to demand they see me. Instead, I swallowed it, as always. Susan delivered the final blow with a satisfied smile. At least you're not a financial burden. Her words landed softly, almost kindly. But the cruelty was precise. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. My chest tightened, my fingers trembling as I set it down. The silence afterward was a cavern. Even the clink of cutlery seemed hesitant. Daniel cleared his throat, his gaze flicking up for the briefest second before he returned to his plate. Still nothing. No defense, no brotherly shield. But then, from the other end of the table, I caught a flicker of something unexpected. Emily Carter Daniel's fiancée, seated beside him, was watching me. Her expression wasn't pity, but curiosity, as if she were seeing the fractures beneath the glossy Thompson facade for the first time. Her gaze lingered, searching, before she smoothed her features back into polite neutrality. I looked down quickly, my pulse thudding in my ears. For once, someone at this table wasn't blind. For once, someone noticed. Emily glances at Claire, curiosity flickering in her eyes. The LifeMap dashboard ticked past 10,000 users, but the number felt meaningful as I read the dinner invitation. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated the cramped corners of my Boston apartment, casting shadows over the stacks of books and half-empty coffee mugs. 10,000 people, real people, now touched by the project I had built in silence. For a fleeting moment, pride flickered through me. But then my eyes returned to the invitation lying on the table, its crisp cardstock like a summons. Another dinner. Another trial by fire under my parents' roof. Rain pattered steadily against the window, soft at first, then heavier, as though the sky itself were voicing my hesitation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the words, family dinner, Sunday, 7 p.m. Attendance expected. That last part wasn't written, but it didn't need to be. I'd lived in their world long enough to know expectation masquerading as invitation. Mark's voice broke into my thoughts, muffled through the phone speaker. So, what's it gonna be? You going or not? His tone carried a mixture of challenge and encouragement, like a coach who refused to let his players sit out the big game. I sighed, pressing my forehead to my palm. You don't get it, Mark. These dinners aren't meals, they're firing squads with tablecloths. On the other end, he chuckled lightly, then softened. Maybe, but if you don't face them, they'll own your silence forever. You've built something real, Claire. 10,000 people believe in you. Isn't it time your family heard the truth, whether they want to or not? His words sank into me, heavier than the rain. Silence had been my armor for years. Let them mock, let them boast. I would just endure. But maybe endurance wasn't enough anymore. Maybe silence was surrender. I pushed away from the desk, pacing the narrow stretch of hardwood floor. My eyes flicked to the mirror mounted by the door, streaked with faint dust. My reflection stared back, hair mussed, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights of coding and worry. I opened the closet and pulled out a handful of dresses, bright, fashionable ones bought on impulse years ago when I thought looking the part might earn their approval. One by one, I tossed them aside until I found the gray dress, simple and understated, not flashy, not begging for recognition, just me. As I held it against myself, Emily's face surfaced in my mind, her gaze at the last dinner, that subtle glimmer of curiosity. She hadn't mocked me. She hadn't dismissed me. In that fleeting look, she had seen more than my parents ever had. What role would she play this time? I slipped into the dress, smoothing the fabric over my frame, and returned to the mirror. My hands trembled as I adjusted the neckline. The rain outside intensified, thunder rumbling faintly in the distance, a reminder that storms didn't wait for permission. Mark's voice echoed from the phone, still on speaker. Claire, you've got this. You don't need their approval. You just need to show up as yourself. That's more than enough. I swallowed hard, nerves twisting with resolve. Stepping closer to the mirror, I held my own gaze. The woman staring back wasn't the girl who left Yale in silence. She wasn't the one who let ridicule slice unchecked into her skin. She was scarred, yes, but stronger. This time, I whispered, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, they don't get to write my story. Thunder cracked in the distance, the storm is coming. "We're not just coding, Claire. We're building an escape route," Mark told me one night as the screen glowed in the empty library. His voice carried a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, the kind you hear from people who know they're gambling everything on a fragile spark. I looked at him over the rim of my chipped coffee cup and nodded, though inside I wasn't sure if we were building an escape or just a mirage. The Boston Public Library had become our second home. By day, its vast halls echoed with the footsteps of tourists and students. By night, it transformed into a cocoon for the desperate and the dreamers. We spread out across the wooden tables, our laptops balanced on stacks of coffee-stained printouts, the weak Wi-Fi dropping every 20 minutes. Still, determination filled the room. The glow of code on the screen felt like firelight in the middle of a blizzard, something that kept us alive even as the cold crept in. LifeMap had grown beyond my imagination. A nonprofit clinic in Dorchester had agreed to a small partnership, giving us credibility we hadn't dared hope for. One of their doctors wrote us a thank you note, saying patients had finally found affordable care options they'd missed before. Those words burned into me like a promise. This mattered. But success came with a cost. One evening, as the dashboard ticked upward, I watched the numbers race past 5,000 users. My pulse quickened, joy rising, until an error message flashed across the server log. Then another. Then a dozen more. The system was straining under the weight of its own growth, each new user both a triumph and a threat. Mark cursed under his breath, his fingers flying across the keyboard, while two of the new volunteers leaned in, offering suggestions. Their voices overlapped, nervous, eager, hopeful. The room buzzed with the frantic energy of a team clinging to a fragile flame. Between coding sprints, I checked my email compulsively, refreshing every hour. Most messages were rejection letters, polite but cold. "We regret to inform you that your application does not meet our funding priorities. While we appreciate your mission, we cannot allocate resources at this time." One after another, they landed in my inbox like stones piling on my chest. Each no whispered the same verdict my family had always branded me with: failure. Mark tried to lighten the weight. "Rejections are just proof we're asking the right people," he said with a grin too wide to be real. But when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw the shadows in his eyes. Then came the call that cut sharper than the rest. A potential funder, a man whose voice dripped with condescension, listened to my pitch in silence before delivering his verdict. "Without proper backing, this project won't last another month," he said flatly. "You're running on fumes, Miss Thompson. Passion isn't a business model." His words clung to me long after the call ended, echoing the very sentences my mother had thrown at me for years. That night, the library emptied out. Volunteers packed their bags, offering quick goodnights. Mark stayed behind, but eventually even he drifted off, muttering about tweaking the code in the morning. I remained alone at the table, the rain outside smearing the city lights into blurred streaks across the tall windows. The laptop screen dimmed as the servers sputtered, each warning notification blinking like a countdown clock. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. I rested my chin on my hands, staring at the project that had become my lifeline. LifeMap was fragile, too fragile, and yet it was alive. My heart thudded with a stubborn defiance I couldn't quiet. In the dark, I whispered to myself, my breath fogging against the cold air, "I won't let it die. Daniel will inherit everything." "It's safer that way," my father declared without looking at me. His tone was as casual as if he were discussing the weather, but the words sliced with surgical precision. The fire in the Thompson residence crackled softly, its glow casting flickers across the polished mahogany panels of the room. Above the mantel hung a portrait of Daniel in his graduation robes, larger than life, painted as though he were already the patriarch of this house. I sat stiffly in the leather armchair, the cold air of early spring pressing against the windows, though the room was warm. My mother sat beside my father, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her pearls glinting in the firelight. She looked at me once, briefly, with a faint sigh before speaking in the same patronizing cadence she had perfected years ago. "It's not personal, Claire. It's practical. Your brother has proven himself capable. Stability matters in a family like ours." Her words carried the sting of inevitability. I could almost hear the echo of Yale, of dinners where every conversation became an audit of my failures. Yet this time, it wasn't about reputation or appearance. This was about erasing me, legally and financially, from the family legacy. Daniel sat opposite me, shifting in his seat, His jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might speak. His eyes darted toward mine, then back to the flames. Silence wrapped around him like a shield. His role was clear. The golden boy who needn't dirty his hands with confrontation. His silence hurt more than my parents' words, because it confirmed what I had always suspected: he would never defend me. The so-called estate planning meeting dragged on, though every word blurred together after my father's declaration. Investments, properties, trusts, it was all parceled neatly in Daniel's direction. I was a ghost in the room, present only to be told I would receive nothing. At one point, my father leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and delivered the verdict with an authority that brooked no dissent. "You will never be heir to this family." The words were heavy, final, like the gavel of a judge who didn't believe in appeals. I felt the air rush out of me, but instead of collapsing under it, something inside me solidified. Perhaps it was the memory of the life map dashboard, of 10,000 people who saw me not as a failure but as a lifeline. Perhaps it was the knowledge that I had already begun carving a legacy outside these walls, one they couldn't control. So I did the one thing none of them expected. I smiled faintly, but enough to make both of my parents blink in surprise. The firelight caught the curve of my lips, and I let the silence stretch before answering. "We'll see." The words hung in the air, quiet but unshakable, a whisper of defiance that unsettled the careful script they had written for my life. "Why do they need me to disappear for Daniel to shine?" I asked, more to the night than to Mark. My voice barely rose above the hum of the espresso machine, but the question had been pounding in my chest for years, and tonight it slipped out, raw and trembling. The cafe was quiet, tucked into a corner street near Copley Square, a safe haven with dim lights and the scent of roasted beans that clung to the walls. Couples murmured over steaming mugs, but our table felt like an island, marked by the weight of confessions. Mark leaned back, his hoodie pulled tight against the early spring chill. He studied me with eyes that seemed to cut past my words into the marrow of what I meant. "Because they don't see you, Claire. They see what they need you to be, and what they need is silence." He paused, stirring his coffee slowly. "But justice doesn't need a family crest. It needs the truth. That's what you've been building all along." I looked down at my hands, nails bitten short, a faint ink smudge from notes I'd scribbled earlier on server upgrades. His words rang louder than the clinking mugs around us. But I didn't feel like justice. I felt like the girl Yale had expelled into the cold. The one who sat at family dinners swallowing shame, who watched her parents raise their glasses to Daniel as though he were royalty. The doorbell chimed, and a couple entered, carrying the damp air of rain with them. I shifted in my seat, restless, when a woman in her 40s approached our table, hesitating. Her eyes softened with recognition, though I didn't know her. "Are you Claire?" she asked. I nodded, wary. She introduced herself quickly, explaining she'd been using LifeMap for her daughter finding affordable therapy after months of hopeless searching. "It saved us," she whispered, her hands gripping mine across the table with unexpected urgency. "You saved us more than the doctors did." Her gratitude cracked something open inside me. I tried to respond, but my throat tightened. Tears blurred the lights of the cafe into a kaleidoscope. For so long I had been measured against impossible standards, told I was nothing, reminded at every turn of Daniel's endless ascent. And yet, here was proof, living, breathing, that what I created mattered, that my existence was more than failure. I broke down, tears spilling over, not out of weakness, but out of release. Mark sat steady beside me, his hand resting lightly on the back of mine, not pressing, not pushing, just anchoring me. The woman squeezed once more before leaving, her presence lingering like a quiet benediction. Silence stretched between Mark and me as I pulled myself back together, wiping hastily at my cheeks. He finally leaned forward, his voice lower, deliberate. "Will you show up at that dinner, or let them keep writing your silence?" The question lingered heavier than the steam curling above our mugs. The envelope shimmered under the lamplight. Family dinner to celebrate Daniel and Emily. Its cream-colored surface was heavy stock, embossed with golden letters as if to remind me that prestige was their language. I turned it over in my hands, the weight of it mocking me, as though the paper itself carried the judgment my parents had never stopped handing down. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator, and the silence made the invitation louder. For several minutes I toyed with the idea of throwing it away, crumpling it into a ball and erasing the night before it ever happened. I could imagine the relief: no icy stares, no carefully sharpened remarks meant to cut me down. But the relief would be temporary, a reprieve that would end the moment my phone buzzed with updates about Daniel's shining triumphs. They would still sit around their table, drinking wine, praising him, pretending I had ceased to exist. I placed the envelope on the counter, staring at it as though it might combust. My phone buzzed. Mark's name lit up the screen. I answered, voice low. "They sent it?" he asked without greeting. "Yes. Claire, listen." His tone was firm but threaded with concern. "If you don't face them, they'll win forever. You'll stay locked in the role they wrote for you. That's what they want, for you to disappear quietly." I pressed my palm against the countertop, feeling the cool stone steady me. "And if I go, they'll do what they always do. Maybe, but this time you're not empty-handed. You've built something. They just don't know it yet." His words stayed with me long after we hung up. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, the blue glow illuminating my face. Out of habit, I checked LifeMap's dashboard. The numbers ticked upward, patient after patient logging in, each data point a quiet defiance against everything I had been told I wasn't capable of. My thoughts drifted toward Emily. I pulled up her social media profile, scrolling through pictures of her and Daniel. At first glance, she seemed every bit the polished extension of his perfection, smiles at charity galas, vacation snapshots. But there was something else, moments caught when she wasn't posed, the way her eyes lingered on the edges of a room, as if observing more than she revealed. I remembered the flicker of curiosity she'd directed at me during the last dinner, when no one else had noticed me at all. It made me wonder, was she like the others? Or was she waiting for the truth? The hours slipped by until I found myself holding the invitation again. My reflection glimmered faintly in the lamplight against its glossy surface. My parents expected me to show up as the family failure, the girl who never measured up, who had nothing but shame to bring to the table. "Not this time. I'll go," I whispered to the empty apartment. But not as the family failure. I slid the invitation back into its envelope and set it neatly beside my laptop. As if on cue, a sharp ping sounded, a news alert flashing across my screen. Tech Health. Life map among rising digital health platforms to watch. The headline blazed like a match in the dark. "Tonight, they won't recognize me." And that's the point, I told my reflection as thunder rolled outside. The storm's growl seemed to crawl through the skyscraper canyons of Manhattan, rattling the glass of the hotel window where I stood. The simple gray dress hung against my frame without ornament, but it felt like armor. My palms pressed against the mirror. And for the first time in years, the woman staring back didn't look like the discarded daughter of the Thompsons. She looked like someone carrying a hidden weapon. The French restaurant gleamed like a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped gold light across velvet walls, and polished knives reflected faces that belonged to boardrooms and trust funds. I stepped into the hush of cultivated laughter, heels muffled against the carpet, and already I could feel the eyes' curiosity, skepticism, recognition tinged with gossip. Whispers rose and fell in subtle waves, the soundscape of people who never had to taste failure yet adored the scent of it on others. Richard was standing near the head of the table, back straight, chest forward, the proud patriarch surveying his domain. Susan glowed at his side, pearls gleaming, her smile wide enough to slice. Daniel sat in the center, haloed by admiration, as executives, lawyers, and distant relatives circled him like moths around a flame. The words floating through the air were drenched in praise. Visionary, leader, heir. Each compliment added to the fortress wall built around him, a wall my parents had made sure I would never scale. I moved toward the table, my steps even, my face composed. I offered no greeting, no apology for being late, no explanation. Silence was my first strike. The gray dress made me nearly invisible, yet I felt the attention sharpen. Susan's eyes flitted to me, then away, as if I were a minor inconvenience. Richard gave a brief nod, formal and empty. Daniel avoided my gaze entirely, smiling at a guest who toasted his latest investment. I sat, folding the napkin into my lap with deliberate care. Wine glasses shimmered, silver forks clinked against porcelain, and the evening spun around me like theater staged for everyone but myself. They spoke of Daniel's penthouse, his promotion, his upcoming wedding. Susan's voice swelled with each recounting, weaving a narrative of success so thick it smothered the air. My parents thrived in that performance, their laughter full, their faces radiant in reflected glory. I remained silent, calculating, sipping water when others toasted, letting the rhythm of their confidence build to its inevitable crescendo. I had no intention of interrupting their spectacle. Not yet. Then Susan lifted her glass. The table quieted instantly, all eyes drawn to her as if she were conducting an orchestra. Her gaze flicked toward me sharp, rehearsed, cruel. "Some of us are destined for greatness," she said, her tone syrupy, practiced. She let the pause linger, the room holding its breath. Her smile cut like glass. "Some for less." The words landed with the precision of a dagger. A ripple of laughter slid across the table, polite at first, then bolder, crueler. My throat tightened, my hands gripping the stem of my glass until it threatened to snap. Every nerve in me screamed to speak, to fight back, but I held still. Not yet. The clatter of a fork broke through the noise. Emily set hers down with care, the porcelain ringing softly. Her eyes, sharp and unflinching, locked onto mine across the table. She did not look at Daniel, nor at my parents, nor at the crowd waiting for me to crumble. She looked only at me. "I know who you are," she said, voice low but clear enough for the entire table to hear. "Daniel is the pride of this family, the only pride," my father declared as if I were invisible. His voice cut through the murmur of conversation, silencing the clink of forks against porcelain, filling the chandelier-lit room with the weight of his verdict. Guests leaned in, glasses paused midway to their lips, as though the proclamation were something sacred. My heart beat steady, not frantic as it once might have. I had been branded before, shackled by those words in countless forms. But tonight the sting did not paralyze me. Tonight, I sat still, letting the fire smolder, waiting. The French restaurant sparkled like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers dangling with ostentation, marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between tables, pouring Bordeaux and carrying plates, as if this were a coronation, not a family gathering. Silk dresses brushed against tailored suits, the scent of perfume mixing with roasted duck and butter sauces. It was a stage, and my parents performed as royalty before their court. Toasts rang out, each one for Daniel, to his leadership at the firm, to his future with Emily, to his vision, his discipline, his brilliance. Their words piled higher than the flowers in the gilded vases at the table's center. Daniel sat flushed with modest smiles, raising his glass again and again, his eyes darting to mine once but sliding away quickly. He knew. He always knew. His silence had always been his refuge, his complicity dressed as neutrality. Susan leaned forward, her pearls catching the light as she turned toward me with a sweetness that curdled in her mouth. "At least your brother never failed us." Her words landed in the hush between laughter, loud as a slap. Knives scraped against plates as guests pretended to busy themselves with food, though their ears stayed tilted toward us. Whispered pity drifted down the table, tiny shards slicing deeper than any outright insult. Poor Claire. Such a shame. I kept my expression smooth, my fingers tracing the stem of my glass. Inside, the coil of anger was tight, but I would not release it yet. Every dismissal was a brick, and tonight the wall they built around me was reaching its peak. My father straightened, shoulders squared, and delivered his final blow. "This family has only one success story," he declared, voice booming across the table as if it were a courtroom, not a dinner. His words sealed the judgment, heavy with the authority he had always wielded. Guests nodded, some out of habit, some in silent agreement, their eyes flickering between Daniel's glow and my shadow. The air seemed to constrict, thick with finality. I felt the weight of a lifetime of diminishment pressing in, the echo of every dinner, every remark, every cold dismissal. Yet even as the walls threatened to close, I sat straighter, silent but resolute, because I was no longer the girl who flinched. And then, a sharp sound split the tension. Emily placed her glass down with deliberate force, the crystal ringing like a bell. All eyes turned as the echo lingered, her gaze cutting across the table with startling clarity. "That's not true," she said. "Claire Thompson, the founder of LifeMap." Emily's voice rang out, silencing the room. The words cracked through the air like lightning, cutting off whispers, freezing silverware mid-air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chandeliers still glimmered overhead. Wine still breathed in half-filled glasses. But the oxygen seemed to vanish, pulled toward the weight of her declaration. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I felt the heat of their stares as if I were under trial, the accused suddenly revealed to be something else entirely. My parents stiffened, their smiles faltering into brittle masks. Richard's jaw locked, Susan's hand trembled slightly, as it hovered over her pearls. Daniel sat frozen, his fork clinking back into his plate, face draining of color. Emily's voice did not waver. "My brother," she began, her tone trembling with memory, "nearly lost his life last year. We tried everything. Doctors, specialists, endless waiting lists. Nothing worked. He was disappearing in front of us." She paused, her eyes finding mine with a mixture of gratitude and defiance. "And then someone told me about LifeMap. It gave us answers in days, connections we couldn't find on our own. It gave my family hope. It gave my brother a future." A murmur rolled through the table. Guests leaned toward each other, names and headlines bubbling to the surface. Tech Health's rising digital health platforms, government grants, thousands of users. I caught snippets of disbelief. "That's her? I read that article. It saved thousands already." The narrative my parents had fed them that I was nothing but failure was beginning to unravel right in their presence. I swallowed, steadying myself. The moment demanded truth, and I would not hide. My voice was quiet, but it carried. "Yes, I built it." Silence followed, thicker than before, because admission made Emily's revelation undeniable. My parents' faces hardened, years of control slipping through their fingers. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came. Susan's lips tightened as if holding back words she no longer trusted to serve her. Emily turned toward them fully now, her eyes burning with outrage that wasn't even hers to carry. She was speaking for me, but also against them, tearing down the false edifice they had built. "Do you realize your daughter has saved thousands of lives?" she demanded, her voice loud enough for the furthest corners of the restaurant. "While you've been busy pretending she was nothing, she was building something extraordinary, something that matters far more than a penthouse or a promotion." Gasps flickered around the table, heads nodding, others watching the collapse unfold with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. The balance of the room had shifted, and then, breaking the fragile silence, Daniel slammed his hand against the table. Plates rattled, glasses shook, a ripple of shock ran through the guests. His face was flushed, his composure gone. "Enough," he roared. "If she succeeds, then what am I?" Daniel's voice cracked for the first time in my life. The words hung, brittle and raw, like glass about to shatter. The restaurant's air seemed to curdle around him, no longer adoration, no longer the chorus of pride he had always basked in, but something sharp and suffocating. His hands trembled slightly against the polished wood of the table, and for once he wasn't the perfect son, the untouchable heir. He was a man cornered by truth. I didn't move. My calmness was deliberate, the silence I offered louder than any rebuttal. Guests shifted in their seats, the velvet curtains trapping us in this strange theater of collapse. My parents sat pale, their faces drained, as if they too heard something foreign in Daniel's tone. Susan's lips parted, but she found no words. Richard gripped his glass so tightly his knuckles whitened. Daniel's confession cracked wider. "I knew," he whispered hoarsely, his voice bleeding into desperation. "I knew about LifeMap. I saw it months ago. I knew what she was doing, and he faltered, looking at me as though seeing me for the first time, but also begging me not to answer. I hid it. I didn't say anything because," his breath shuddered out, "because if she succeeded, then what am I? What's left of me if I'm not the only pride they have?" A ripple of gasps swept through the room. Conversations sparked in murmurs, the sound of polished forks and knives forgotten. A few guests looked at me with something close to admiration, while others turned toward Daniel with disbelief etched into their faces. For the first time, the golden boy wasn't shining, he was unraveling. I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting through the tension like a blade. "You think recognition is a chair only one of us can sit on, but if they couldn't love both of us, that's their failure, not mine." My words landed heavy, the truth undeniable. His eyes blinked rapidly, tears threatening but never falling, his pride fighting even as it died. Around us, phones buzzed, screens lighting up with breaking news. Guests glanced down, whispers rising again. LifeMap confirmed with a $150,000 state grant. The headline ricocheted through the crowd like a hammer strike. Suddenly, my name was not just a whisper, not just Emily's declaration, it was fact, reinforced by the state itself. Claire Thompson, founder, recognized, funded. The shift was seismic. Business partners who had come to congratulate Daniel now exchanged glances, doubt flickering like wildfire. His carefully polished image, his credibility, The aura of inevitability around him, all of it cracked under the weight of this new reality. Emily's eyes never left me, but there was a glimmer there, a recognition that she had chosen the right moment to ignite the match. My parents remained statues, their empire of silence caving in with every second Daniel crumbled in public. And then came the murmur, from the end of the table, barely louder than a whisper yet sharp enough to slice the last threads of illusion. Then what else have the Thompsons hidden? The question spread like smoke, filling every corner, suffocating, inescapable. I'm not here for pity. I'm here to set boundaries, I told them in the side room after the dinner. The room was smaller, quieter than the grand hall we had just left, but the echoes of laughter and whispers still seemed to cling to the walls. Half-drunk champagne glasses lingered on the side table, bubbles long gone flat, a fitting symbol for the night's illusions collapsing. My parents stood close together, Richard's jaw set hard as stone, Susan's fingers trembling against the pearl clasp of her necklace. Daniel had followed us, but now slumped in a chair at the corner, head bowed, silent, the golden child reduced to a shadow of himself. Richard spoke first, his voice heavy with command, but threaded with something more fragile than he wanted anyone to notice. We didn't understand your world, Claire. This digital thing, this project, it wasn't something we could measure. I didn't let him finish. You didn't want to understand. That's different. You weren't blind, you closed your eyes. Because if you had opened them, you'd have seen me all along. Susan flinched as if struck. We thought we were protecting you. We thought... Her words crumbled as her breath shook. You thought silence and comparison would make me disappear. I cut in, not cruel but steady, measured. Every dinner, every gathering, you held Daniel up as proof of what I wasn't. You branded me before I even had a chance to define myself. Daniel stirred in his chair, but he said nothing. His silence now was not complicit. It was the silence of defeat. Susan's eyes glistened, tears spilling despite her effort to hold them back. Claire, we didn't know. We didn't know it hurt this much. You knew, I said, softer, but no less piercing. You saw the way I stopped speaking at your table. You saw the way I shrank, and you let it happen. Because it was easier than admitting you'd chosen one child over the other. Richard's face remained stoic, but his fists clenched tight at his sides, knuckles pale. He looked at me not as a father in control, but as a man realizing too late that the fortress he built was crumbling. I took a step closer, my voice carrying the weight of every silent night, every swallowed word. From now on, there are new rules. No more dinners where I'm paraded as a failure. No more advice wrapped in disdain. No more laughter at my expense. If you want to be in my life, it will be as equals, not as judges. My life will no longer be narrated by you. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult they had ever thrown. Susan's shoulders trembled, her tears streaking mascara down her face. She clutched Richard's arm, but he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even reach for her. His stoicism cracked only in the stillness of his stare, as though he was seeing a line being drawn he couldn't cross. Then, Susan's voice, broken and small, slipped into the air. Then maybe we already lost you. The spotlight blinded me, but for once it felt warm. The stage stretched wide before me, the hall alive with 1,000 eyes. Doctors in white coats, investors in sharp suits, advocates with notepads, an entire world of listeners gathered under the vaulted ceilings of Philadelphia's National Health Tech Conference. The murmur of voices that had filled the room moments ago faded into silence as I stood at the podium, steady, shoulders square. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking from attention. I was claiming it. Mark sat in the front row, his hands folded, a quiet grin tugging at his lips. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough, the anchor that had steadied me through every rejection email, every sleepless night spent coaxing life map into survival. The weight of this moment wasn't about proving myself to him or to anyone, really. It was about stepping fully into the truth I had built. I spoke without notes, my voice calm, even. I told them about the beginning, a broken laptop, data stitched together in dim libraries, nights of weak Wi-Fi, and strong coffee. I told them about the first person we helped, a woman who had gripped my hands and said I'd done more than doctors ever had. I told them about the clinics that had come to us, desperate for tools, and how LifeMap had scaled one fragile flame into thousands of steady lights across the country. Slides glowed behind me, graphs climbing upward, faces of families who had found answers where once there had been silence. And with each word, I felt the warmth spread not from the lights, but from within me. I didn't tremble, didn't hesitate. Every syllable was a thread of the tapestry I had fought to weave, and now it hung before them undeniable. When I paused, the silence broke into sound. Applause first, then rising, swelling into a standing ovation that thundered through the hall. Chairs scraped back, feet pounded the floor, voices cheered. I blinked against sudden tears, not of weakness but of recognition, the kind that came not from bloodlines but from truth finally heard. Then, from somewhere near the back, a woman in a nurse's uniform rose. Her voice carried through the auditorium, raw and real. She gave us back our dignity. In our rural clinic, when no one listened, LifeMap listened. She gave my patients hope. The applause surged again, louder, the sound washing over me like a tide. I gripped the edges of the podium, grounding myself, breathing through the swell of emotion. For years I had craved acknowledgement from a family who had refused to see me. Now I understood. Justice didn't come in their approval. It came here, in the light, in the gratitude of strangers whose lives had changed because I refused to let my work die. My voice lowered, words meant for me alone, yet they slipped free into the microphone. They can't take this from me. Not anymore. The lights dimmed, the conference drawing to a close, the ovation still humming in my chest. I stepped off the stage, through the curtain, out into the autumn air. The sun struck gold across the Philadelphia skyline, crisp leaves scattering at my feet. For the first time, I felt untethered, free. Betrayal may have marked the beginning of her story, but it did not define its ending. The false pride of her family collapsed under the weight of truth, and what once was whispered as failure became celebrated as resilience. Justice, though delayed, came with a force that silenced arrogance and restored dignity. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt her struggle as your own, or 2 if you're still left wanting more.